The night it all began was one of those evenings that had no business turning into anything memorable. I was 25, restless, and stumbling through life with no real direction. Most of my friends had steady jobs, relationships, or at least some semblance of a plan. Me? I was drifting, working odd hours, spending too much time in bars, pretending I wasn't terrified of becoming a failure. That night, the city streets were quiet, save for flickering neon lights of convenience stores and the distant hum of traffic. I had been walking home later than I should have. After wasting money, I didn't have on drinks that didn't make me feel any better. My jacket wasn't warm enough for the night chill, and I buried my hands in my pockets as I cut through a back alley, thinking it was a shortcut. It wasn't. Halfway down, I heard the shout, "Hey!" Stop right there. My stomach dropped. The sharp tone of authority froze me before I even turned around. My heart hammered in my chest as I spun, and that's when I saw him, broad-shouldered, tall, with the kind of stance that made it obvious he belonged in a uniform, a police officer. His flashlight beam cut across my face, blinded me for a second, and then landed on the ground near my feet. "Hands where I can see them," he ordered, voice steady, commanding. I obeyed without a thought, fingers trembling as I raised them. I hadn't done anything wrong, not really, but the weight of his gaze made me feel like I had. He stepped closer, and I caught the faint glint of his badge and the outline of his holstered weapon. Everything about him radiated control, power, and for some strange reason, safety too. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, scanning me up and down. "Just walking home," I muttered. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to. His eyes narrowed slightly, assessing. Then, to my surprise, his expression softened, almost imperceptibly. He sighed, lowering the flashlight a little. "This isn't exactly the best part of town to be wandering around alone at night. You could get yourself into trouble." The irony of him saying that while standing over me, handcuffs glinting on his belt, wasn't lost on me. My pulse was racing, though not entirely from fear. There was something about him, his strong jaw, the way his uniform clung to him, the authority in his tone, that didn't just scare me. It pulled me in. "I didn't mean anything," I said quickly, as if to prove my innocence. "I was just trying to get home faster." He studied me for a moment longer, then reached for the cuffs. My breath caught, a mix of panic and something I couldn't name. The cold steel clicked around my wrists, firm but not cruel. He guided me toward a patrol car with a steady grip on my arm. In those first moments, I told myself it was humiliation that made my face burn. But deep down, I knew there was more, something stirring inside me that I wasn't ready to admit. He opened the car door, guided me in, and leaned down so our eyes met. Up close, I noticed his eyes weren't as hard as I thought. They were sharp, yes, but behind the discipline there was warmth, kindness even. It disarmed me more than the handcuffs did. That night, I thought my life was ending in disaster, just another chapter in a string of poor choices. But looking back now, I know better. Because little did I know, those handcuffs would bind more than just my wrists. They would tie my fate to his, in ways neither of us could have imagined. After that night, I told myself I'd never see him again. It was easier that way. File the memory under bad decisions, and try to forget how his eyes had lingered on me, how my skin still tingled where his hand had gripped my arm. He was a cop, after all, a uniform, a symbol of everything structured and disciplined. And me? I was chaos wrapped in human skin. We didn't belong in the same sentence, let alone the same world. Life moved on, or at least it pretended to. I went back to my odd shifts at the warehouse, back to the same takeout meals, the same restless nights. But every so often when I closed my eyes, I saw him. That sharp jawline, the way his voice dipped when he warned me about the neighborhood, the weight of the handcuffs. Half fear, half something I didn't dare name. Weeks later, I found myself sitting in a small coffee shop tucked between a bookstore and a laundromat. It was my refuge, a place to drown in caffeine and scribble half-baked thoughts into a worn-out notebook I carried everywhere. The bell above the door jingled, and I barely looked up until I did. There he was. No uniform this time, just dark jeans, a gray T-shirt stretched across his chest, and a jacket slung casually over his arm. For a second, I thought I was imagining him, conjuring a ghost from my guilty daydreams. But then his eyes landed on me, widened in recognition, and the ghost smiled. My heart stumbled over itself. I gripped my coffee cup tighter, suddenly very aware how ordinary I must have looked. Messy hair, scribbled notebook, cheap sneakers. He walked over, each step measured, and stopped at my table. "Well," he said, that same steady voice softened by amusement. "Didn't think I'd run into you here." I swallowed hard. "Yeah, me neither. You look different." He chuckled. "Out of uniform, you mean?" "Exactly," I admitted. "You look normal, less intimidating." Something flickered in his expression. Pleasure, maybe. He nodded toward the empty chair across from me. "Mind if I sit?" I hesitated, then gestured for him to. He set his jacket on the chair back, sat down, and suddenly the small cafe felt even smaller. "So," I began, trying to sound casual, "do you patrol this coffee shop now?" He grinned, and God, it was unfair how good he looked when he did. "Off duty today. Just grabbing a cup before heading home." "And you? Writing something important?" He glanced at my notebook. "Not really. Just thoughts." "About what?" I shifted uncomfortably. "Life. Trying to figure out where I'm going. Or if I'm going anywhere at all." He leaned back, considering that. "You're 25, right?" "Yeah. How'd you—" "I remember. You told me that night." He said it so simply, but the fact that he remembered caught me off guard. "And you?" I asked, curious. "How old are you?" 33, he said. Old enough to feel like I should have it all figured out, but still questioning some things. I tilted my head. "Like what?" He hesitated, his eyes dropping to the table. "Like whether the badge defines me, or if I'm more than a uniform, whether I'm allowed to want something different." There was a weight to his words, one I didn't fully understand but felt deep in my chest. For the first time, he wasn't just a cop. He was a man, one with doubts, hopes, cracks in the armor. "I get that," I said quietly. "I've been floating for years, waiting for something to make sense. Most days, I just feel like a disappointment." His gaze snapped back to mine, firm but gentle. "Don't say that. You're young. You're searching. That doesn't make you a failure." The conviction in his voice startled me. No one had ever said it like that before. My family thought I was wasting my life. My friends joked about me being lost. But here he was, seeing me in a way I didn't expect. The conversation flowed from there, slipping past small talk into something rawer. We talked about music, childhood dreams, the loneliness that sometimes crept in during the quiet hours. He told me about the pressure of always being the strong one, the expectations that came with the badge. I told him about my fear of never finding a place where I belonged. Somewhere between his second cup of coffee and my nervous laughter, a spark lit between us. Subtle, unspoken, but real. His hand brushed mine when he reached for a napkin, and I swear electricity jolted through me. He pulled back quickly, cleared his throat, but the way his eyes lingered said more than either of us dared to voice. When he finally stood to leave, he looked down at me with something almost like regret. "It was good seeing you," he said. "Really good." I nodded, not trusting my voice. As he walked out, jacket slung over his shoulder, I knew this wasn't the last time. Fate wasn't done with us yet. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel lost. I felt like I was waiting for something, or someone. I couldn't stop thinking about him. Every time I tried to push the memory aside, it came back stronger. The warmth in his voice, the way he leaned in close at the coffee shop, the quiet strength that seemed to follow him even out of uniform. And yet, I kept asking myself the same question. How could I be falling for someone who arrested me? It was ridiculous, almost laughable. If I told anyone, they'd probably say I had some strange fascination with authority figures or that I was drawn to danger. But it wasn't that simple. It wasn't about the badge or the handcuffs or even the way he commanded a room. It was about him, the man underneath the uniform. We started running into each other more often. At first, it felt like coincidence. passing him on the street, spotting him near the diner where I sometimes grabbed a late meal. But soon, it wasn't coincidence anymore. He'd slow his patrol car when he saw me walking home. I'd linger outside longer than I needed to, hoping he'd be there. One evening, as the streetlights buzzed above us, his car pulled up beside me. The window rolled down, and his familiar voice cut through the night air. "Need a ride?" I hesitated, then slid into the passenger seat. The interior smelled faintly of leather and coffee, and the hum of the radio was low in the background. For a while, we didn't talk. He just drove, the city passing by in flashes of neon and shadow. Finally, he spoke. "This isn't exactly normal." I glanced at him. "What do you mean?" He kept his eyes on the road. "Me picking you up like this. Talking to you outside of what my job allows. It's complicated." Complicated was an understatement. He lived in a world of rules, of clear lines drawn between right and wrong. And me? I blurred lines without even trying. "Do you want me to stop?" I asked softly. His jaw tightened. No. That single word hung in the air, heavier than anything else he could have said. We began to find little pockets of time together, always in secret. Sometimes it was in his patrol car, parked on a quiet street, while we talked about everything and nothing. Other times it was late-night walks where no one would notice us, our voices low, our shoulders brushing occasionally, sending sparks racing through me. But for all the warmth that bloomed between us, there was also a wall made of his duty, his oath, the weight of expectations he carried. One night, as we sat in his car under the dim glow of a street lamp, he finally let me see the cracks. "I can't let anyone know about this," he said, his hands gripping the steering wheel, though the car wasn't moving. "If they found out, it wouldn't just be gossip. It could cost me my career." I watched him, the tension etched into his shoulders. "Because of me?" "Because of us," he corrected quickly. Then, after a pause, he added, "Because cops aren't supposed to blur the lines. We're supposed to be untouchable, unshakable. And being with you," he trailed off, shaking his head. "Being with me makes you human." I finished for him. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw the struggle, duty against desire, the man against the uniform. Society didn't make it easier. He was the picture of masculinity, the kind of man people expected to be tough, stoic, immune to anything resembling vulnerability. Loving another man didn't fit into that image, especially not a man like me, with no badge, no shield of authority, just raw edges and restless searching. But the more time we stole together, the more I realized that wall between us wasn't unbreakable. Piece by piece, it crumbled in quiet moments, like when he laughed so hard at one of my stupid jokes that he had to wipe his eyes, or when he admitted in a hushed voice that sometimes he hated how the uniform made people fear him before they even knew his name. One night, we walked along the riverbank, the city lights reflecting in the water. It was late, the streets empty, and the only sounds were our footsteps and the faint rush of the current. I shoved my hands into my pockets, glancing sideways at him. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked, "Choosing this job, this life?" He took a long time to answer. "Sometimes. Not because I don't want to protect people. I do, but because I wonder if it cost me something personal. Something I didn't even know I wanted until now." His words sank into me, and for the first time, I let myself imagine what it would be like if there were no walls, if he could reach for me without hesitation, if I could lean into him without fear of who might be watching. We didn't cross that line yet, but the air between us grew heavier, charged with something undeniable. Every brush of his arm against mine, every look held a little too long, every silence that said more than words ever could. It all built towards something we both wanted but couldn't yet claim. And still, I couldn't shake the truth. The world saw him as an officer first, a man second. And I was asking him, just by being there, just by being me, to risk tearing down the image that kept him safe. The wall was still there, but I could feel it weakening. And deep down, I knew that one day soon, one of us would push hard enough to break it completely. It was strange how quickly he became part of my life, without anyone knowing. To the outside world, we were strangers, two men who might pass each other on the street without a second glance. But in the quiet spaces we carved out for ourselves, he was everything. My anchor, my storm, my secret. And yet, for all the moments we shared, there was always a shadow hanging over us. One night, we were parked on a quiet hill overlooking the city, the patrol car engine ticking softly as it cooled. He stared out at the skyline, the lights glittering like stars, and I could tell something weighed on him. "You ever think about what people would say?" he asked suddenly. His voice was softer than usual, stripped of its usual authority. I frowned. "About what?" "About this. About us." He turned his head, and the look in his eyes was so raw it nearly broke me. If they knew, if my colleagues found out, if my family found out, it wouldn't just be whispers. It would be judgment, ridicule, maybe worse. The honesty in his words cut through me. I wanted to tell him not to care, that love was stronger than anyone's opinion. But I knew it wasn't that simple. His badge wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a weight he carried every day. "Are you scared of losing your career?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "It's not just a job, it's who I am. Or at least, who I thought I was supposed to be. The protector, the strong one, always in control. But with you," his jaw tightened, then relaxed. "With you, I feel like myself. And I don't know if I'm allowed to have that." I reached out without thinking, my hand brushing his arm. "You are allowed. You're allowed to be more than the badge." He looked at me like he wanted to believe it, but fear still lingered in his eyes. That night, I shared my own truth. I told him about the loneliness that clung to me like a second skin, about the years I'd spent drifting, feeling like I was too much for some people and not enough for others. I told him how every failed friendship, every broken attempt at love had left me convinced I wasn't meant to be chosen. "You make it sound like you're unworthy," he said firmly. "Maybe I am," I whispered, "but when I'm with you, it feels different. Like maybe I'm not as lost as I thought." For a long time, we just sat there, the silence stretching between us like a fragile thread. His eyes softened, and for a moment, I thought he might lean in. Instead, he turned back to the city lights, his shoulders heavy with unspoken words. It wasn't until a week later that everything changed. I was walking home after a late shift when a group of guys blocked the sidewalk ahead of me. They were loud, drunk, and itching for trouble. One of them shoved me as I tried to pass, and another laughed, making some crude comment I didn't bother to catch. My heart pounded. I'd been in situations like this before, and they never ended well. "Where you going in such a hurry?" One of them sneered, stepping into my path. Before I could answer, a familiar voice cut through the night. "Back off." Relief and disbelief collided as I saw him, my officer, emerging from the shadows. He wasn't in uniform, but he carried himself with the same authority. The group hesitated, then muttered something under their breath before scattering into the night. He was at my side in seconds, his hand gripping my arm. "Are you okay?" I nodded, though my knees were still shaking. Yeah, thanks to you." His grip didn't loosen. His eyes searched mine, fierce and protective. "They shouldn't have touched you. No one should." Something inside me cracked then, not from fear, but from the realization that this wasn't about attraction anymore. It wasn't just the way his voice sent shivers down my spine, or how his smile lingered in my thoughts. It was the way he stepped in without hesitation, the way he made me feel safe in a world that had so often made me feel small. It was love. I knew it in the way my chest tightened, in the way the night around us seemed to blur until there was only him. We stood there on the empty street, his hand still on my arm, our eyes locked. The tension was unbearable, electric. Slowly, he leaned closer, and I felt my breath hitch. His face was inches from mine, his warmth brushing against me, and for a heartbeat, the world held still. But then he pulled back, his jaw clenched, his hands falling to his sides. "I can't," he whispered, almost to himself. "Not yet." The words stung, but I understood. He was torn between two worlds, the man who wanted to kiss me and the officer who was terrified of what it would cost him. I swallowed hard, forcing a shaky smile. I get it. But inside, my heart was screaming, because in that almost kiss, I'd seen the truth. He wanted me as much as I wanted him, And no wall, no badge, no fear could erase that. As we walked side by side the rest of the way to my apartment, I knew the line between us had blurred too far to ignore. It wasn't a matter of if anymore. It was only a matter of when. It happened slowly at first, like a secret we were both afraid to speak aloud. After that night when he saved me, something shifted. The wall that had stood between us wasn't gone, but it was cracked wide enough to let something real slip through. We began to see each other more often, never in public, never where anyone might recognize him. At first, it was small things. He'd swing by after his shift, still in uniform, and I'd hand him a mug of coffee while he leaned against my kitchen counter, exhaustion written on his face. I'd tease him about the way he polished off half my leftover pizza without asking, and he'd just smirk like he owned the place. Those moments became the anchor of my days. The nights that used to feel endless and lonely were suddenly filled with the sound of his laugh, the warmth of his presence. I learned he preferred his coffee black, that he hated pickles, that he had a scar on his shoulder from a football injury in high school. Little pieces of him he never showed anyone else. And in return, I let him see me. Really see me. The messy parts, the doubts, the way I still hadn't figured out who I wanted to be. He never judged me for it. Sometimes, when I'd get caught in a spiral of self-loathing, he'd just reach across the couch, squeeze my hand, and remind me with a simple look that I wasn't alone. One night, we ended up cooking together, if you could call it that. I was trying to make pasta, and he insisted he could help, even though it was clear he hadn't spent much time in the kitchen outside of reheating takeout. He managed to burn the garlic bread, and when I teased him about it, he grabbed a dish towel, snapped it at me, and laughed until his shoulders shook. It was such a simple, ridiculous moment, but it filled the room with a kind of light I hadn't felt in years. Later, we sat on the couch, bowls of unevenly cooked pasta balanced on our laps, watching some old movie neither of us really paid attention to. His arm brushed against mine once, twice, until finally it stayed there warm and steady. I leaned into him without thinking, and he didn't move away. That was how it started, the slow unraveling of restraint. It wasn't about lust, though the tension between us was undeniable. It was about intimacy in its purest form. The way his hand lingered on mine a little too long, the way his gaze softened when I laughed, the way he'd rest his head back and let out a sigh that only came when he was here, away from a world. One night, when the city outside was asleep, we sat across from each other in the dim glow of a lamp. He looked at me like he was memorizing every detail, and then, with a voice low and certain, he said, "I've never felt like this before." The words lodged in my chest, too heavy and too beautiful to carry. I wanted to tell him I felt the same, that I'd never had anyone look at me like I was worth choosing. But all I managed was a whisper, "Me neither." We didn't rush. Every step was careful, reverent, as though we both knew how fragile this was. The first time his lips brushed mine, it was tentative, almost questioning. I kissed him back, and the world fell away. It wasn't fireworks or flames. It was steady, grounding, like finally finding a place that felt like home. We grew closer in ways that went beyond the physical. Sometimes we'd stay up until dawn just talking. About his childhood, about the weight of the badge, about the dreams he'd tucked away, because he thought they didn't fit the life he'd chosen. Sometimes we didn't need words at all. Just the comfort of lying together. His heartbeat steady against my ear was enough. But as our secret deepened, so did the risk. He started noticing the whispers at work. A colleague asking why he looked so tired lately. Another making a comment about how he was disappearing after shifts. He brushed it off, but I could see the tension building. One evening, he showed up at my apartment with a storm in his eyes. He paced the living room, running a hand through his hair, before finally blurting out, "They're starting to ask questions." My stomach dropped. About us? Not directly. Not yet. But they know something's different. They can sense it. And if they push hard enough, he stopped, fist clenching. I could lose everything. I didn't know what to say. Guilt twisted inside me. Was I worth the risk? Was I asking too much of him, dragging him into something that could ruin the life he'd built? He must have seen the turmoil in my eyes, because he stopped pacing and knelt in front of me. His hands found mine, strong but trembling. "Listen to me," he said firmly. This isn't your fault. It's mine. Because I let this happen. Because I wanted this to happen. His voice broke on the last word. I've spent my whole life hiding behind a badge, behind rules and duty, and everyone else's expectations. And then you came along, and for the first time, I feel alive. I can't pretend that doesn't matter. I stared at him, my heart aching with love and fear all at once. But what if it costs you everything? He held my gaze, steady and unflinching. Then I'll decide what matters more. The air between us was thick with emotion, the weight of his confession pressing down on both of us. I wanted to believe we could have it all, that love could exist without consequence. But in the back of my mind, the question lingered, sharp and unforgiving. How long could we keep living in the shadows before the world found out? For now, though, I let myself believe in him, in us. I pulled him close, and he held me like he never wanted to let go. And maybe that was enough for tonight. The weeks that followed were a blur of whispers, shadows, and stolen glances. I could feel in the air, the shift. What began as something sacred between just the two of us now felt fragile under the weight of eyes that seemed to linger too long at the station, at the coffee shop, even in the neighborhood where I lived. It started with a casual comment I overheard in passing. Two officers laughing, one nudging the other. Your boys spend a lot of time off duty in strange places, huh? I wasn't sure they meant me, but the tone was sharp enough to slice straight through my chest. When I told him about it, he froze. I had never seen that look on his face before, a mix of fear and anger, but not at me, at the situation, at himself, at the world that wouldn't understand. People talk, he said, his voice low, heavy, and once they start, they don't stop. You don't know how cruel it can get. I wanted to tell him I did know, that I had lived my whole life under the weight of judgment, but I stayed quiet, because this wasn't about me. This was about him, about everything he had worked for, the badge, the oath, the honor he carried like a second skin. The rumors didn't stop. They grew. Each time I saw him, he seemed a little more distant, a little more guarded. His laughter didn't ring as freely. His hands didn't linger as long when he brushed against mine. And yet, I clung to those small touches, desperate to believe they still meant everything. One night, I found him waiting for me outside my apartment. His patrol car wasn't there. He came in his own civilian, as if that would somehow soften the truth. We need to talk, he said. The words I had dreaded, the words that made the ground tilt beneath me. Inside, he paced, running a hand through his hair, the way he always did when the weight was too much. It's getting bad. They're watching me, asking questions. And his voice cracked, just barely, but enough for me to hear it. I can't let this ruin everything. I felt it before he said it, the cold wave crashing over me. You're ending it. He stopped pacing, finally looking at me. His eyes were glassy, tortured. I don't want to. God, you have no idea how much I don't want to. But I have to. I laughed, but it wasn't joy, it was broken, shattered. You don't have to. You're choosing to. There's a difference. His jaw clenched, but he didn't argue, because he knew I was right. He stepped closer, reaching for me, then pulling back at the last second like his hand had burned. I'm doing this to protect you. To protect us. No, I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. You're doing it to protect yourself. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's what you need. But don't pretend it's for me. The silence between us was deafening. He wanted to hold me. I could see it in every line of his body. I wanted to collapse into him, to beg him not to leave. But pride kept me rooted, held me together even as I broke apart inside. When he finally walked out the door, it felt like the world went with him. The days after were hollow. I went through the motions, work, errands, meaningless conversations, but nothing felt real. My apartment was too quiet without his laughter, my nights too cold without his warmth. I would lie awake, replaying every memory, every smile, every whispered confession, torturing myself with what-ifs. But slowly, painfully, I began to realize something. I had been waiting for someone to save me for so long that I had forgotten I could save myself. I didn't need his uniform, his strength, his presence to give me worth. I was worth something on my own. It didn't stop the ache, but it gave me enough strength to stand, to breathe, to keep going. And maybe that's why, weeks later, when he showed up again, I didn't crumble. It was raining that night, the kind of downpour that blurred everything into streaks of silver. I was walking home, soaked, when I saw him standing at the corner, no umbrella, just standing there like the storm didn't matter. Our eyes met, and my heart betrayed me, leaping into my throat. He stepped forward, his face raw, stripped of all the walls he had built. "I tried," he said, his voice breaking. "I tried to live without you, but I can't. I don't care about the whispers. I don't care about the badge. None of it matters if I don't have you." And just like that, the storm inside me broke too, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with relief so powerful it almost knocked me down. I didn't run to him. I didn't need to. He came to me, closing the distance, and when his arms finally wrapped around me again, it wasn't about protection or secrecy or fear. It was about love. And for the first time, I believed that maybe love was enough. It was late when the knock came, the kind of hour when the world is quiet and shadows stretch long against the walls. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it, but then it came again, firm, steady, familiar. When I opened the door, he was there. No uniform, no badge pinned to his chest. Just him. His eyes were swollen, like he hadn't slept, and rain still clung to his hair. "I can't keep doing this," he said, voice rough. "Running from you, running from myself." Before I could answer, he reached into his pocket. He pulled out his badge and his handcuffs, the very things that had brought us together, the things that had stood between us ever since. His hands shook as he set them down on my kitchen table, as though they weighed more than iron. "I've spent years letting this define me," he continued, his gaze fixed on the gleam of metal. "The job, the duty, the idea that I had to be someone else to be worthy. But the truth is, none of it means anything without you." I stood frozen, my heart slamming in my chest. "What are you saying?" I whispered. He finally looked at me, eyes burning with something raw and unguarded. "I'm saying I choose you. Not recklessly, not by walking away from everything I built, but by building something new. With you, I'll still wear the uniform. I'll still serve. But this time, I'll do it honestly. No hiding, no shame, because loving you doesn't make me less of a man or less of an officer. It makes me more." The tears I'd been holding back for weeks finally broke free. I covered my mouth with my hand, trying to keep from sobbing, but he stepped closer, gently pulling it away. His thumb brushed my cheek, catching a tear before it fell. "I don't know how the world will react," he admitted softly. "Maybe some will turn their backs. Maybe it'll be hard. But I've realized something, and it's simple. I can face any storm as long as you're standing beside me." In that moment, every wall between us crumbled. I closed the space, pressing my forehead to his, breathing him in, the scent of rain, the warmth of his skin, the quiet strength in his trembling hands. It was everything I had missed, everything I needed. "You're sure?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Because I can't survive losing you again." His answer came without hesitation. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." And then he kissed me. Not the almost we had stolen in shadows, not the hesitant brushes of lips weighed down by fear. This was real, fierce, unapologetic. It was love, unbound. When we finally pulled apart, his badge and handcuffs still sat on the table. But now, they weren't barriers. They were symbols of balance, his duty and his love, coexisting. And as he laced his fingers with mine, I knew one truth with absolute certainty. Those handcuffs hadn't trapped me the night we met. They had set me free. It's strange how time softens even the sharpest edges. A year ago, I was standing in the rain, clinging to a man who was terrified of choosing between love and duty. Now, I wake up every morning with him beside me, sunlight pouring over tangled sheets, the sound of his laugh filling our home. He didn't quit being an officer, though the decision was heavier than I ever knew. Instead, he shifted into a different role: community outreach, mentoring younger recruits, building bridges where walls used to stand. It suited him more than the constant patrols ever did. Maybe it was fate's way of saying he didn't have to lose one world to embrace another. At first, people whispered. Some looked at us with pity, others with judgment. But whispers fade, stares get tired. And slowly, the people who mattered most began to see us for what we were, not a scandal, not a risk, not a mistake. Just two men who had chosen each other. The community where I once felt like an outsider now feels like home. Neighbors wave when we walk our dog. Friends drop by for dinner, no longer careful with their words. Even at the station, the air shifted, because respect grows where courage leads. Sometimes I think back to that night. The flashing lights, the cold steel of the handcuffs biting into my wrists, the fear coursing through me like fire. It felt like the end of everything I knew. But really it was a beginning, because in that moment, fate wasn't punishing me. It was guiding me, binding me, not to a cell, not to shame, but to the one man who would see me, love me, fight for me, the one man who could set me free. Tonight, we're sitting on our balcony, the city alive beneath us. His hand rests over mine, steady, warm. I turn to look at him, and he meets my gaze with that same mix of strength and tenderness that first disarmed me. I used to believe freedom meant escaping everything that held me down. But now I know better. Real freedom is choosing who you give your heart to, without fear, without apology. And I chose him. Always him.